Hello all, I'm Kel Kidman and welcome to Breaking on the Daily, where today we are actually going to begin with a bit of an talked about them enough. I mean, I haven't gotten off even a weekly rant in about a week and a half. Man, it's been too long. So, what is China doing this time that's gotten me all up in a tussle? Well, they're trying to get in charge of vaccine passports. And man, you've already seen my opinions on vaccine passports and other such authoritarian measures done by any government, but China doing it specifically sounds like a recipe for absolute disaster. And if any country lets this happen that isn't directly affiliated with China and thus has no choice, you're an idiot. And also probably a Chinese stooge, because I don't know what other explanation you could possibly have. If America lets this happen with the WHO, especially since we just got back into them because of Biden, which yeah, seems like a good decision there, buddy. Wow, we're gonna look like idiots. Well, I guess the dead people are going to look like idiots. I'm not making any references there, by the way, YouTube. Don't worry about it. Just remember, the algorithm can't see context. Nothing happened. But this is a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. To go over it again, vaccine passports are a bad idea because limiting people's travel based on a disease that doesn't really harm anyone above the age of 75, unless they're morbidly obese and over around 500 pounds, is silly. Really silly. As in incredibly silly. It's silly to make people who are healthy wear masks for such a thing, even though that is a much less intrusive thing with much more confirmed possible risks as compared to a vaccine which is new and, frankly untested on a large population. I mean, it is now, but we're splitting hairs there. Largely, the risks of a vaccine, even if it is from a reputable organization, is still fundamentally unknown to anyone who hasn't taken it, or doesn't know anyone who has taken it. So requiring that happens, especially when the efficacy of the vaccine is in question by people who are supposed to be actually promoting it, like Dr. Fauci, who spends all of his days now simply downplaying the effectiveness of the vaccine because he wants to keep his authoritarian policies in place for as long as possible. I don't think that there's a good argument for vaccine mandates or vaccine passports, as is being pushed by many people, but now China's trying to get in charge of with the WHO. Is a really bad idea, and I'm honestly 50-50 on whether the WHO is actually going to allow them to do that. Because, to be frank, the WHO is controlled by China, by and large. Not because it's the most well-funded part of our country from the WHO, but it's because it's the only country that is funding the WHO in a massive way that actually has teeth in possibly removing that funding if they don't do what they want. Because you see, what America, at least in its current position, is, Biden's not going to remove any funding from the WHO under any circumstances, so they don't have anything to fear from Biden. Even if they don't do what he wants, or if they let him do something, or let China do something in contravention of American interests, they don't have to worry all that much about losing funding from America, because Biden made a whole campaign point of saying we're going to get back into the WHO and keep funding them to be Chinese stool pigeons or something like that. And I don't know. I don't know what the strategy there was, but apparently it didn't work. I guess that's the only thing you could describe there. Moving on, though, we have a story out of LA now, where 3 grocery stores were forced to close because of hazard pay requirements that have been put up in California. And this is a big problem, mostly because these are not great ideas. I mean, the idea that we're going to give 17-year-olds or, cashiers, people who are young, the freaking hazard pay for COVID-19, a virus which has almost no risk to them. They are infinitely more likely to not even know they got it in the first place than they are to actually have even a serious disease, much less one that would actually kill them. The idea we're giving them hazard pay for that? Well, why aren't we giving them hazard pay for the flu during flu season? Now, of course, I say that, but the left is in all likelihood going to say, yeah, they should get hazard pay, because the left doesn't understand anything about economics, nor do they understand the sort of absolutely devastating economic consequences of implementing such a policy. But this right here is actually an example of those economic consequences, because what happens is that grocery markets, the ones who are targeted by the hazard pay law, are going to be more likely to shut down, particularly if they are and they have a large amount of capital to boost them up. Then they don't have to worry as much if they're losing a little bit out, especially when their competition is being wiped out by it because they don't have such a liquid base. They don't have to deal with the competition at that point. And at that point, they're actually making more money rather than less from this sort of thing. And that's a fundamental problem with almost every single leftist economic policy you could possibly point to. Because no matter what you're talking about from the left, because it is something which depends on central authority to enact and also enforce, it is inevitably going to support nothing but the central authorities and establishment players that it does end up supporting, even when the leftists claim to be anti-corporation, because the fact of the matter is, they aren't. Even in communist countries, there is commonly what you would, depending on the language and whatever particular words you want to use, what you could describe as corporations. That's what a syndicate is. A syndicate is no different from a corporation, at least not in kind. Because the point of a corporation or a syndicate is that it is a supposedly privately funded company, in the case of a corporation, or a worker co-op, that is completely controlled by the government, that is government funded, government sponsored, and which imposes itself on the rest of the community. So, when leftist policy gets into place, it makes sense that it would embolden such companies, or corporations, or syndicates. And that is what happens. Because many of the corporations that are being promoted through these authoritarian lockdown measures are not private businesses. Amazon's not really a private business. Neither is Walmart. All of these places are not private businesses because they have deep ties to the American government. They have deep ties, they lobby all the time, and not only that, but they get funding from the government. In the case of Google, which is the only one I remember specifically at this point, $600 million is what Google has gotten in terms of subsidies and other such grants from the government. $600 million. That sounds really private to me. Yeah, it really seems like we're just dealing with a private corporation. You know, it really feels, which is kind of contradictory terms, private company, I mean. You know, it really feels like we're dealing with a free market when one side's being funded by the government and the other isn't. Which is why it's so silly to me when people say, well, we've tried the free market solution, we need to clamp down on Twitter or Google with government. That doesn't make sense, because those two corporations are both funded by the government to the tune of millions of dollars. Millions of dollars. Some $100 millions. I don't remember if Twitter had gotten to the $100 million mark. Frankly, Twitter's kind of a small player in this game. But Google has gotten $600 million. It's ridiculous. And that's a number from 2015 or something. It's a really old number, actually. It's probably much more now. It might have even gotten into the billions mark. That's obviously not fair. And when you're comparing it to someone like DuckDuckGo or someone like BitChute, who are getting no government funding and actually are perpetually lifted above their head, The BitChute has to deal with Ofcom all the time, and that's why they ban videos. It's the only reason they really ban videos is because they have to deal with Ofcom, because Ofcom says, oh, that is potentially illegal, so that's like, okay, we'll remove it. Which, that's a silly, when people claim, oh, BitChute censors too, it's a silly claim, because if you don't understand that Britain's kind of really authoritarian in terms of certain speech codes and media controls, then you don't talk, okay? Because you don't understand what's actually going on. They're doing that because they have a sword of Damocles above their head in the form of Ofcom that could potentially destroy them at any moment if they don't do what they say. And so that's why they mostly ban video. When they ban videos, that's why. Just getting that out of the way. Moving on, though, to our last story. The Texas Attorney General has told local authorities that they have until 6 p.m. to suspend mask mandates or he'll sue. Oh man, I love Ken Paxton. He has been great over the past few months, and this is just another example of such. Man, I just got done talking with him yesterday, about him yesterday with regard to the Twitter stuff, and man, just more and more comes out from this guy. He is doing a lot of stuff really fast. I don't know how effective all this is going to be, especially since it seems that he's kind of dividing his attention, and potentially too much. But this is a good move, all right? Because in this case, the state is telling them, okay, stop doing mask mandates. Don't do it except for under these conditions. And then I think it's Austin or Houston. I forget which. Maybe both are not doing that. And so the Texas AG is like, well, then you're going to get sued. Which I don't know how, what the efficacy of the suit will potentially be. Reason being that they may have an argument for, well, this imposes too much on localities. Localities can do what they want, whatever. But at the same time, they also have to argue the constitutionality of mask mandates to begin with, kind of. Because mask mandates as a policy in terms of actually mandating masks on any level of government is questionable, because the idea that the government can make you wear anything other than simple obscenity laws, things like, you have to actually wear some amount of clothes. Other than that, there is questionable constitutionality article of clothing, and that's claim that somehow commonly that mask mandates are similar to, wearing pants mandates. But it really isn't equivalent, because there are many ways to skin a cat in the cases of just covering up your private parts. There is a whole lot of ways to do that. You could have a kilt, you could have pants, shorts, whatever. There's many, many different ways of doing that thing. And so the government is only demanding that you do that thing in whatever way you see fit in terms of that, because it's an obscenity law. All it's saying is, don't be obscene, and there is an objective obscenity that you can define and actually make clear in law. The problem with masks and why it's different is that there is not a whole lot of ways to skin a cat on this one. You either have a mask on, which is a fairly specific article of clothing, or you don't. It's that simple. And the idea that you are going to be mandated to wear a specific piece of clothing becomes a much bigger issue, because not wearing a mask is not objectively obscene. If anything, wearing a mask is closer to that standard than not wearing a mask, because people don't particularly like when people wear masks around them. I mean, that has been a huge problem, and it really does make you much more likely to be a criminal in most cases, in most sane years. That has become less of a thing as mask mandates have become a thing, and many people have just worn masks out in public. But it's still kind of a truism. It's a truism outside of the insane world that they live in. But if they were to make the constitutional argument that, well, it's an emergency and masks work, well, that would depend on masks actually working. And as I've established in my Monday video, and I suggest you go back to that and also look at the sources down in the description so you know what I'm actually talking about, the mask mandate narrative has been almost completely destroyed because the actual effect of masks was a 1% or so reduction in the actual caseload. which is not enough to justify a mandate. Under any reasonable metric that a judge would use, 1%, a situation where you're not getting around 98% of cases, 98% of cases are happening anyway, even with mask mandates, that is not an effective enough policy to justify mandating masks. You could recommend masks, but you can't actually mandate them to warrant that. And also, I would argue the emergency itself is not so urgent that it warrants any mandates of the sort. That's sort of the argument from the anti-mask perspective, and I'm sure these sorts of arguments are going to be made in this lawsuit if the places don't actually open up by then. I don't know if they will. These are two, I believe it was actually Houston. They're just California refugee preserves at this point, just awful. So we'll see where that goes, and I'm hoping to update you on that and many other things that Ken Paxton is doing over the next few weeks. And that's about all. I'm Kel Kidman. This has been Breaking on the Daily. Also, before I forget, if you like that video, do in fact subscribe. And also, if you're on YouTube, look down in the description. There are many, many pretty links down there that will send you to places that aren't terrible, that aren't systematically destroying all independent content. Go down there, and you'll find many pretty links that send you to places like my BitChute, that send you to places like my Odyssey, and my Minds, and other places where I also like to put my thoughts on occasion. Well, that's all. I'm Kel Kidman. This has been Breaking on the Daily, and I'm out.